All right, buckle up for a deep dive, you guys, into some, well, let's just say, fascinating territory.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be looking into Siddheswara Paramahamsa, maybe better known as Chris Butler,
Okay.
founder of the Science of Identity Foundation, formerly the Chaitanya Mission.
Right. The Science of Identity Foundation.
Yeah, and we've got a whole mix of sources this time. Online forums, news articles, even parts of an open letter.
Sounds juicy. Lots of different viewpoints then.
Oh, yeah. Definitely some conflicting stuff in there. So our mission today, I think, to really figure out who Butler is, what's this organization about,
Okay.
and, well, all the noise around them, good and bad.
Quite the journey then.
For sure. So let's start at the beginning. Chris Butler's story.
Good.
Sources paint a picture of him in Hawaii early life, right in the middle of that 60s counterculture scene,
Ah, the 60s.
even experimenting with psychedelic drugs.
Now that's interesting. Psychedelics and the whole search for meaning, right? Exploring consciousness, all that. Makes you wonder how that early exploration maybe shaped his later spiritual path.
Yeah, it's like planting those seeds in that era for his spiritual seeking.
Makes sense?
And then he joins the Hare Krishnas,
Yeah.
rises up, becomes a guru, and then bam,
What?
breaks off, forms his own group,
Wow.
which becomes, you guessed it, the Science of Identity Foundation. Big change, though. What do you think led to that?
Tough one. Different philosophy, maybe a personality clash, or could it even be, a power struggle within the movement? We should keep an eye out for that as we go through everything.
For sure. Good point. And while he's leading this new group, he starts a chain of health food stores, too. Down to earth.
Down to earth, okay.
Pretty ambitious alongside, being a spiritual leader.
Yeah, and that's actually where some sources start raising red flags. The whole idea of him being a renunciate sannyasi.
Right. Supposed to be detached from material possessions.
Exactly. So accumulating wealth through business, through donations, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It just doesn't quite add up for some people.
You see that hypocrisy accusation pop up a lot.
A lot.
Some former members even say he used his followers, their labor, to make himself rich and was living this lavish lifestyle while they weren't.
And there's this story, almost hard to believe, about him needing expensive air purifiers for his homes.
Really?
But then still needing an oxygen tank.
Wow. Yeah, that's a stark contrast, isn't it? Not quite the simplicity you'd expect.
Not quite.
Okay, so let's look closer at Butler's teachings themselves, what he was actually teaching, the practices. One source says he didn't want his followers interacting with other spiritual groups.
Interesting. That kind of isolation, it's often used to, in a way, make people dependent on the group.
Makes you wonder what the reasoning was behind that.
It does, yeah.
And this idea of being isolated is even more noticeable when you hear how some describe life at SEF centers and schools. Strict rules, focus on simple living, very austere for followers, which seems pretty different from how Butler was allegedly living.
Oh, so that contrast again.
Yeah.
Huh. Leader in comfort, followers making sacrifices. We've seen that before.
Yeah, like two different worlds within the same organization. Then you've got accusations of Butler using offensive language.
Yep.
Doesn't really fit the peaceful, loving image, does it?
Definitely adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah.
What makes people overlook that kind of behavior when they believe in someone's spiritual authority? It's that charisma, fear of repercussions, maybe.
Right, like a hidden side to things.
Could be.
And then, you won't believe this, there's this story about Butler's toenails, offered as Mahaprasad to followers. Apparently this comes from his stepson.
Okay, now that's, whether it's true or not, it shows how far devotion can go. Or manipulation, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of devotion tested, there's this case of Krishna Karunadas, originally Mahaprabhus. He leaves Butler's group, joins another one under Srila Narayana Maharaja. This caused a huge reaction from Butler and his followers.
Really?
Intense. The letters we found. Anger, accusations of stealing a disciple,
Wow.
harsh language, real sense of ownership, talk of betrayal. Like, Krishna Karunadas was property, not a person with free will.
That brings up the whole guru-disciple dynamic, doesn't it? To get this, we need to talk about the different types of gurus mentioned. Diksha guru and Siksha guru.
Yeah, break that down, because I'm sure some people are hearing those terms for the first time.
So Diksha guru, think of them as formally initiating you into a lineage, like a spiritual parent.
Okay.
Siksha guru is more like a mentor. You learn from them, but it's not that same level of commitment.
Got it.
That Diksha guru relationship, it's seen as more binding, loyalty, obedience, all that.
I see. So that explains why losing a disciple to another guru would be such a big deal for Butler.
Exactly. It's almost like fear of losing control,
Yeah.
in larger Vaishnava community.
That's a great point. Now let's talk about someone you might know, Tulsi Gabbard.
Okay.
Prominent politician, but also, important for us, a former disciple of Butler.
Right. The Gabbard connection adds a whole other layer, for
Yeah.
sure. Some sources say Butler and the Saf had a lot of influence on her political views, her actions, even shaping her career.
It's definitely controversial. Some sources even say they were directly involved in her campaigns, policy decisions, that kind of thing. Gabbard denies it all, says Butler was a positive influence, nothing more.
Interesting.
She defends him quite strongly, actually. But even with her denials, there's still that controversy. Our sources show financial ties between Gabbard's campaigns and Suf businesses.
Oh, I see.
Raises eyebrows, for sure.
Definitely adds fuel to the fire. Makes you think about how far that influence reached
Not right.
and what impact it might have had on her career.
Things get murky here. It reminds us how tricky it can be to separate personal beliefs from politics. But we've got a lot more to uncover about Butler and the Suf, so let's keep digging.
Back again for more of our deep dive. Last time, we ended on that guru-disciple thing and all the controversy with Tulsi Gabbard and Butler and the Sif.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
For sure. Now, we got to get into some of the heavier stuff from the sources. Allegations of abuse, manipulation, all happening within the Sif. Financial exploitation is a big one that comes up again and again.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing hearing from so many former members about this system of giving, donating to the organization, like constantly expected, even when people were struggling financially.
Right, and remember we talked about Butler's businesses?
Yeah.
Some sources actually say those businesses, especially the down-to-earth stores, were funneling money right back to him and his inner circle.
It's almost like blurring the lines, Spiritual leader, but also focused on personal profit. Doesn't really fit with that renunciate sannyasi idea.
Not really. And it goes further. There are claims that followers were basically forced to work for those businesses
Really?
for little to no pay, all under this guise of spiritual service.
Wow, that's messed up.
It is. It raises questions about consent, exploitation,
Yeah.
Were these people led to believe they were doing selfless service, when actually it was making Butler richer.
It's like manipulating people's faith, their desire to help for personal gain.
Exactly.
But it's not just the financial stuff, right? Our sources also describe this whole pattern of emotional, psychological manipulation within the Sif.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Former members talk about this culture of fear, intimidation, being really pervasive in the Sif. Butler and his close people, they allegedly use tactics like public shaming, threats of spiritual consequences
To control people.
to silence dissent.
Can you give an example? Like, what would those threats or punishments look like?
Imagine you're a devoted member, right? Committed your life to Butler's teachings, but then you start to have doubts.
Oh.
Maybe you question something. According to these sources, even a hint of that could get you in big trouble. Public humiliation, being ostracized from your friends, family within the group.
So losing your whole support system.
Exactly. That's terrifying. And it's incredibly effective at keeping people silent. They're too scared to leave, even if they're unhappy.
It's a powerful way to control people. And it seems like that control went beyond just the teachings, right? Into every part of their lives. We saw sources talking about strict rules on food, clothes, even how people could decorate their homes.
Right. Classic pattern for groups that want total control. It's about enforcing conformity, obedience, not just what you think, but how you live. Everything.
Erasing individuality, replacing it with, like, Butler's mold.
Yeah, and then you combine that with the isolation from the outside world, it gets pretty scary.
Yeah, it's like you can't even see the problems, let alone get help from outside the group.
You're stuck in that echo chamber. Everyone around you reinforces the same beliefs, the same behaviors.
But we should say not everyone who joins a group like this is automatically a victim.
Oh.
Brainwashed, right?
Of course not. People are drawn to these groups for different reasons. Searching for belonging, purpose, maybe just answers to life's big questions. It's entirely possible some people are genuinely happy in this if.
So it's not black and white.
Nope.
But the allegations are serious, especially from those who left who say they were hurt.
Absolutely. We can't ignore those.
Definitely not. And remember that whole incident with Krishna Karuna Das, the guy who left to join another guru?
Yeah.
It really shows the power dynamics, the control
Yeah.
in those relationships.
Big time. Those letters, remember? Butler and his people, they were furious.
Yeah.
They talked about Krishna Karuna Das like he was stolen, not like he made a choice.
Right. It's like they saw him as a possession, not a person who could decide for themselves.
Exactly. And it's not just Butler. Some followers sent really aggressive emails, even talking about bad karma, like as a punishment for leaving.
Wow. Trying to control someone's spiritual path like that, it's just dot wrong.
Makes you think, what is it about this kind of guru-disciple thing that creates those reactions that
Mhm.
need to control people? A healthy spiritual relationship, it should be about respect,
Mhm.
open communication, wanting the best for the student, not this possessiveness.
Definitely raises some ethical questions. Back to Tulsi Gabbard and that whole controversy about her ties to Butler and the Seth.
Right, because even though she denies any influence, some sources suggest something deeper going on.
Yeah, deeper and more intertwined. Some say Butler and the Seth were actively involved in her political career, giving money, guiding her decisions.
Interesting.
And we even have evidence of people who worked for both the Seth and for Gabbard's campaigns, like Sunil Khamenei.
Oh,
That's a pretty direct connection, hard to ignore.
hard to ignore, yeah. Makes you question how separate those lines really were. Personal beliefs and political actions, like she claims.
And it becomes even more relevant when you look at some of Gabbard's political positions, especially on foreign policy.
Mhm.
Critics point out how closely those views align with the SIF's ideology, which has been described as anti-Muslim and supportive of authoritarian regimes.
That's a controversial one. Hard to separate from the whole discussion of religious beliefs and politics.
Definitely. It reminds us to be careful, think critically about the information we're getting, especially when it comes to powerful people.
Right, right. Now, let's shift gears a bit. Let's look at these allegations of abuse and manipulation, specifically within the SIF's schools and centers. Some former members describe really harsh living conditions, emotional abuse, even physical punishment.
Yeah, those descriptions of austere living conditions, some sources go even further. They talk about sleep deprivation, forced labor, beatings even.
Wow, if that's true, that's really concerning. Raises serious ethical questions about how they treat children, vulnerable people.
One former member even used the term trauma bond to describe the effects of that environment.
Trauma bond, huh?
Yeah. Like those shared experiences, the hardship, suffering, were used to create this messed up sense of connection, loyalty.
That's a classic tactic. You see it in cults and other manipulative groups. Break people down, take away their sense of self, and then rebuild them as totally dependent on the group.
Really insidious. It's a reminder that abuse can be hidden, masked by spirituality or good intentions, and it's hard to see, even harder to escape.
Absolutely. So we've talked about financial stuff, emotional manipulation, fear, intimidation.
hmm
Are there other tactics Butler and the Seth use to keep control over their followers?
What else can we find in the sources?
One thing that keeps coming up is control of information. Former members say any outside information, especially anything critical of Butler or the Seth, was completely banned.
Like an information bubble.
Exactly. You only hear what they want you to hear. And even within the group, they had levels of knowledge. Certain teachings, texts, only for the most devoted members.
Like a reward system. Be more obedient, more committed, and you'll get access to the secrets.
Exactly. It's classic manipulation. The promise of hidden knowledge just for the chosen few. And when you combine that with social pressure, fear of speaking out, it's powerful indoctrination.
Hard to break free from that.
Very hard. And then there's the issue of Butler's alleged homophobia and anti-Muslim views.
Yeah, several sources, former members, news articles, they all point to a pattern of him saying really offensive stuff about LGBTQ plus people and Muslims.
That's disturbing, especially the impact it could have on his followers. Some former members even talk about graphic videos shown to kids in the SIF schools with violent and homophobic content.
It's hard to imagine the damage that could do, especially to young minds.
It's a reminder that bigotry exists everywhere, even in places that seem spiritual or good.
And it wasn't just words. Sources say Butler told his followers to cut off contact with LGBTQ plus people and Muslims, even family and friends.
Wow, that's social isolation on another level. Really harmful. It reinforces the group's control, limits your support network, makes you depend on them for everything.
It's sad to think about the impact on people's lives. Broken relationships, missed opportunities, all because of this prejudice.
It is. It speaks to the bigger problem of prejudice in society.
So, with such serious allegations, have there been any attempts to hold Butler and the SIF accountable?
There have been lawsuits, over the years, alleging all sorts of things: financial stuff, fraud, sexual abuse, even wrongful death.
I remember the case of Kasia Sosha. Her suicide really brought attention to the SIF. It made people question whether the organization was responsible for its members' well-being.
Right. That case and others show the potential consequences of the SIF's practices if these allegations are true.
But getting legal justice, especially when it comes to religion, it's hard. A lot of those lawsuits have been dismissed or settled out of court.
It's true. The SIF has a history of fighting back hard, using their resources to silence criticism, protect their leadership. It's a tough fight for those seeking justice.
The legal system can be complicated, especially with religious freedom involved. But even if the legal wins are few, the efforts to expose the SIF are still important.
Definitely. Former members, journalists, activists, they've brought this issue to light. That's sparked important conversations, which is huge.
It's raised awareness, which is key for prevention, right?
Exactly. When people know the warning signs, they can make better choices about their spiritual path.
Protect themselves from getting involved with harmful groups.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting yourself, it's also about helping others who might be stuck in these situations.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are the big takeaways for our listeners? What should they remember about Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation?
I think the biggest thing is, even when you're searching for spiritual enlightenment, you can't just turn off your critical thinking. You can't just blindly obey, especially not charismatic leaders. It can be dangerous.
It's a good reminder that no one, not even a spiritual leader, has all the answers.
Right. And this story shows how important it is to really look closely at any group, any person who demands total loyalty, who controls information, isolates people, all those red flags we talked about.
Being discerning, being skeptical, even when it comes to spirituality.
Absolutely. In the end, true spiritual growth, it often means asking tough questions, challenging authority, trusting your gut feeling.
Empowering ourselves and others to make our own choices and to prioritize our well-being, our freedom in our spiritual journeys.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation. We've covered a lot of ground. Butler's early days, the counterculture, and then all those disturbing allegations about the SEF. It's been pretty heavy, but what I'm thinking about now is what happened after all this came out? What's the lasting impact?
Yeah, that's the important question. The SEF, they still have a core group of followers, dedicated, but there's no denying that the bad press, those serious accusations, they had an effect. Some former members talk about membership going down, people leaving disillusioned.
Makes sense, right? When you have that kind of foundation-shaking stuff, it's got to affect people's faith, their trust. What about Butler himself, though? Did his reputation take a hit?
Oh, absolutely. He used to be seen as this charismatic, respected leader, but as more and more allegations came out, investigations went deeper, that image got tarnished, for sure. He's definitely a controversial figure now.
More scrutiny, more criticism of his teachings, his leadership. So has there been any legal action, attempts to hold Butler, the SIF, accountable?
There have been lawsuits, yeah, over the years, people alleging all sorts of things, financial exploitation, fraud, sexual abuse, even wrongful death. Serious charges, trying to get justice for those who say they were harmed.
I remember that case, Kasia Socha. Her suicide, it really put the SIF in the spotlight, made people ask, is the organization responsible for its members' well-being?
Right. That case and others like it, they raise these big questions about what the SIF was doing if these allegations are true and the consequences.
But getting legal accountability, when you're talking about a religious group, it's tough. Many of those lawsuits, they hit roadblocks, got dismissed or settled out of court.
Yeah, the SEF, they have a history of fighting back in court, using their money and lawyers to silence people, protect their leaders. It's not easy for those seeking justice.
It shows how complicated the legal system can be, especially when it comes to religion, freedom of belief, all that. But even if the legal wins are limited, those efforts to expose the SEF, they matter.
They do. Former members, journalists, activists, they've raised awareness. And that's crucial.
Because it helps people understand what to look out for, right?
Absolutely. Knowing the warning signs, the red flags, it can protect people from getting caught up in these harmful groups.
And it can help us support those who are already involved, maybe struggling.
For sure. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they remember about Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation?
Yeah, what's the big picture here?
For me, it's a reminder that even when we're searching for spiritual truth, we can't just turn off our brains. Blind faith, unquestioning obedience, especially to a charismatic leader, that can be dangerous. It can lead to people being taken advantage of.
We can't forget that. No one, not even a spiritual leader, has all the answers.
Exactly. And this story, it highlights how important it is to really look at any group, anyone who demands total loyalty, controls information, isolates people from others.
Mm.
All those red flags, we can't ignore them.
Discernment, skepticism, those are important, even or maybe especially in spiritual matters.
Absolutely. True spiritual growth, it often means questioning things, challenging authority, trusting your own gut feelings.
It's about empowering ourselves and others to make our own choices, to put our well-being, our freedom first in our spiritual journeys. That's what we need to remember.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deck dive, everyone. We hope you found it insightful, something to think about.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and remember, your own judgment, your own discernment, that's your best guide.